Jeff Kishore with Home Point Financial.
My name is Joe Malerba with Remax Coast and Country.
One of the things we wanted to talk about today is multiple offer situations and how that affects the real estate side, how that affects the financing side. More and more, because as we've talked over the last few weeks, inventory is pretty low. So when a nice hot property pops on the market, we often see ourselves in these multiple offer situations. From your perspective, because you see that in the beginning stages, after they're pre-approved, you're shopping around for a house. Are you running into that as much as I'm seeing from the financing side?
So, yes, because of the tight inventory, we're running into two problems. One, the really nice houses are selling really, really quickly. And because the market's starting to heat up, sometimes it does take a little while for appraisers to catch up with value. So we are running into multiple offers, both on the sell and buy side, representing the sellers and representing the buyers. And that does have a lot of implications as you're ready to put your home on the market and as you're ready to go out and purchase a really nice house. The homes that are really selling the most quickly are the homes that are the nicest. The homes that have already been finished pretty nicely, the homes that are already staged pretty nicely, and the homes that have a really great presence online. But as you're out there as a buyer, getting ready to purchase your very first home, we think there's a lot of steps that you can take in order to help your offer be seen highest and best. And with multiple offers, it's not always just the price that makes a difference. The terms are also very important. So being more flexible with the seller in being able to close more quickly, being more flexible so that they can have a little more time if they need it, making sure that the seller knows that you're not going to beat them up over every detail on a home inspection.
And how do you do that in the offer stage? How do you let a seller know that?
So there's a couple different things. One, a lot of people like the idea of as-is clause on a house, meaning you're buying a property as is. I personally think that's a little nonsensical. And the reason is this. There are pertinent facts that will greatly affect the value of a home. So if the light bulb in the front hallway doesn't work, it really doesn't mean anything to the price. And if the light doesn't work either, if you change out the light, it is what it is. It's not going to come up anywhere. But if the septic system has failed, that's now a pertinent fact that would have to be disclosed to a different buyer. So as is doesn't mean that you're going to take on a $15,000, $20,000 job. It's still a reason enough for you to back out of the contract. The inspection clause is still a realistic thing. So telling the seller you'll be willing to purchase the property in as-is condition doesn't exclude you from doing the inspections and backing out of the contract based on the outcome of the inspections. But to that same effect, because the seller now has this information disclosed to them, they would need to address it with the buyer, whoever that may be. Or they would need to come up to terms. So that doesn't mean they're going to agree to do everything, but it does mean that that's now something that they know. So it could be that they had no idea that the septic system wasn't working. Then all of a sudden with a report, now they know that it's not working. Even if you have an as-is clause in your contract, that is still something that if you decided to back out, they would have to disclose now to every buyer willing to purchase the property, and therefore it is something they would probably need to address in some way, shape, or form. So if I were representing my buyer, I would tell them certainly we'd be willing to write an as-is clause in a contract, understanding that material defects, that's what that is, a material defect to the house, is still a negotiable item. If the seller decides not to negotiate with you at all, you can still back out, you can still move forward, you can still take it on.
And backing out, you mean backing out free and clear of any penalties?
Correct, yes. And it still costs you the money for your home inspection, but you get your deposit money back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is the most important. Obviously, we want to protect the buyers. Anytime we're representing the buyer, Joe represents the buyer, I represent the buyer. Our interest is to make sure that the buyer's deposit is protected, because that's the largest sum of money outside of the upfront costs of inspections and appraisals that are involved in that part of the transaction leading up to the closing.
And most importantly, you know, we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We
Right.
want to make sure that if you have a $15,000 repair, then you know about it and you can budget for it, or you have that money in the bank. We don't want you to go out there and purchase a house and turn around and have this huge bill and now you can't afford to live in it. In the same sense, as a seller, we also want you to know that when a material defect comes up in your home inspection, even if you have an as-is clause in your property, your purchase and sales agreement, that's still something that would need to be disclosed. That's still something that you would need to turn around and tell other potential buyers.
Right.
And because of that, it's in your best interest to work with the buyer. What I've typically seen is either the seller agrees to do it, or depending on where the appraisal came in, the buyer can sometimes add a little bit of money into the purchase price, or the buyer can split the cost with the seller, but it's still a negotiation. It's not always taken on completely by the seller or by the buyer.
Have you, in the deals that you've seen, these multiple offer situations, are you seeing any homes under appraised? Has that been an issue from the ones that you've seen in the recent past?
So I haven't had that happen yet this year, but I did have it happen last year.
Okay.
And I had a property that we had on the market for $400,000. We had 3 separate offers. Each offer actually came in at $395,000. So for whatever reason, all the offers came in at about the same price. So the sellers ended up picking an offer based on terms, not just on price, because they're all the same price. Although the home was worth every bit of the $395,000 that we sold it for, because the market was starting to appreciate and we didn't have any direct comps to this exact house,
Okay.
the house appraisal ended up coming in at $380,000. So it came in $15,000 below what we had it listed for. In the same sense, the buyers did not agree to pay all that $15,000 up front, which is what they would have had to do. They had VA financing. The sellers weren't going to agree to $380,000 because they would have rather put it back on the market. And we had to sort of find a reasonable scenario where everybody could lose a little bit, but not everything. So the buyers came up to $385,000. The buyer's agent and myself, the list agent, each reduced our commission by $1,000, and the sellers made up the difference, so we ended up selling it for $385,000 with a reduced commission. But the problem, and the problem that was here, is that because inventory is tight, prices are rising. Because prices are rising, there are always enough comps out there to support the value of a higher priced home, even if the demand is there. So in those scenarios, there are real situations where the homes can underappraise. Jeff mentioned a little bit about how government financing works in a multiple offer situation. Do you want to go over that?
Yeah, as it pertains, as the appraised value pertains to financing, with any program, any lender on the planet is going to determine the value of the home is the lower of two numbers, the appraised value or purchase price. So if the home overappraises, then the purchase price is what the value is for the next 6 months. If it underappraises, we actually look at the new purchase price being that amount. So hypothetically speaking, you're buying a home for $100,000, it appraises at $90,000. In our eyes, the value and the purchase price drops to $90,000. So
And
essentially, what?
these appraisals stick with the house for,
120 days to 6 months, depending on the program.
so could somebody hypothetically get a second appraisal?
The seller technically has a legal right to rebut an appraisal and have an appraisal done on their own dime, and we can rebut an appraisal for any financing program. So that does exist.
Have you ever seen it happen?
I have seen it happen.
Effectively.
On VA, I have not, because typically what happens is the VA appraisal department, actually at the Department of Veteran Affairs, it leaves our hands, and the rebutted appraisal or the additional comps provided by the agents will be reviewed by their on-staff appraisers, and I've never seen one rebutted and increased. But just recently, I had a refinance transaction, so not pertaining to a purchase, but my manager had looked at the appraisal, noticed that it was under what it should be just based on the comps, asked the appraisal management company to review it. They reviewed it and increased the value. And it had no impact on the financing because it was still well over what it needed to be, but it just didn't look right. So sometimes you don't even need that second appraisal as much as you can essentially rebut with adding comparable sales from the agents
And that
in any
happens
transaction.
occasionally.
It happens occasionally, yeah.
Okay.
So
If
yeah,
there are multiple offers and you have government financing, it can obviously affect you because you may not have the extra money to bring to the closing table.
right, because typically they have the lowest down payments. And then the buyers, the sellers, and both agents on many of the government programs also have an addendum to the contract that everybody will sign that basically states that in the event that it underappraises, that it gives the buyer the legal right to back out free and clear of any penalties. So Joe and I were having a discussion earlier about whether or not that supersedes a clause in the contract. So if you were to write a contract and state the buyer will come to the closing with the difference, that I'm actually going to have to look that up. And maybe we just take this part out completely. But
Well, so the reason why I brought up the appraisals is two reasons. One, because the appraisal does stick with the property for 4 to 6 months.
yeah.
As a seller, it is in your best interest to still work with a buyer at that point. It sucks. It's not the best case scenario, but in the scenario that your house underappraises, you are going to need to work something out.
Well, and keep in mind this too. So FHA, I believe it's 4 months. I can look into that. VA is 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So that gets logged into FHA Connection, which is where we log the appraisals. So
it goes with the property.
So right, the next buyer wants to come in, they're gonna have their own new FHA appraisal done. They can't because when they go to pull the FHA case number on the website, FHA Connection will say there's already an appraisal attached to this address, and then any new buyer will be forced to use that particular appraisal. Same thing for VA. So with FHA and VA, very specifically, the website it'll be logged into whichever web portal, based on the financing. Conventional doesn't have that. However, I'm told, and I have been told, that has been in the works. But as for Fannie and Freddie, appraisals are not attached for any period of time because there's no web portal that we would upload the appraisal into. But FHA and VA, you will be stuck with that appraisal if you are selling a property. So if I'm gonna, just speak to the sell side, if you say I'm gonna reject this appraisal altogether, you wouldn't be able to accept that type of financing from another buyer without using that very same appraisal. Does that make sense?
So just to reiterate, when you're selling your home, multiple offers are a real thing. There are a lot more of them than there have been in the past. The way you're going to get multiple offers is, again, I think you need to be working with an experienced agent, and I think your home needs to be staged. You need professional pictures. You need an awesome presence online so that you have as many buyers coming through as possible. In addition, because appraisers and appraisals can be an issue, an experienced agent is going to make sure that they meet the appraiser there, and they try to offer some comps of value. They're also going to make sure that they have a list of all the upgrades that you've done to the house so nothing gets missed, and that will certainly help make sure that you don't have an issue. If you do have an issue with the financing and somebody has government financing, that is a reason for them to be able to get out of the loan. A lot of times the buyer still wants to buy the house and you can still work it out, but it is something that you need to be thinking of as you put your house on the market. And as you're a buyer, as you're looking at these houses, you need to be aware that if you bid too high, you might run into a scenario where you either A, have to bring in additional money to the closing table, or B, you might not be able to purchase the home because you don't have the money to pay the difference and the seller isn't willing to sell it for less. So as the market heats up, sometimes we do run into these times where the appraisals and the values and the sold prices haven't caught up to where the demand is. And that means that you're going to be bidding on more properties. Properties are going to be selling more quickly, and sometimes we'll have a problem with appraisals.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if I have to finish with something, what I'd like to finish with is that I think interest rates are still low. I think rent prices are still very high. I think although we have a challenge with inventory, it's still more affordable to buy than it is to rent. And I think you're still in a great time to buy on them.
And for all this talk about the interest rates going up, I mean, we've been talking about it for months now, and in all reality, they haven't done much. They might have even come down a little bit. So it is such a good time to buy. You just have to be ready. So
That's right.
Pre-approval in hand, because the minute something comes on the market, it's in good shape, it's a good quality house, so little inventory, it's on and off the market in 24 hours.
Absolutely.
Maybe not 24, but within a couple
Yeah,
days.
within a week.
Yeah.
Within a week, it's on and off the market with multiple offers. But anyways, I'm Joe Morba from Remax Coast and Country.
And I'm Jeff Short with Home Point Financial.
Have a wonderful day, and if you have any questions, give us a call.